It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. The guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcasted weekly from the kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. My name's Lewis, and I'm the host of the show. And if there's one thing that sort of determines there's a barometer of your existence, it's having to do something like this weekly. It's funny, it's not so much the interviews that gauge my mood. Having someone over to chat will quickly adjust my mood if it doesn't seem quite right for such said activity, but having to do these little intros each week, as I say, is a barometer of of how things are doing inside my head, and I have been flat the last few days for reasons that I could be forthcoming about, or I might not be forthcoming about, but it's cold. I can be forthcoming about that, and I did hit my foot. I did hit my cold morning foot on something hard and steel the other morning, which just sort of added a layer to the dystopian nature. The dystopian nature of the beginning of my week. Goodness, okay. Hey, I was in that radio game for years. I can. Sometimes you have to wake up a whole city and be chipper, even if you're not. So let's do that. My guest this week is the most common, the most interviewed, the most guested name on the podcast. Another David joins us. We've had Dave Peck, the pinball man. We've had Dave Roper, the drum and bass music promoter man. We've had David Lawrence, the Shakespeare director man, pop-up globe man. Now we've got David Ridler, who's very much not a Dave. We talk about that. He's a David. David Ridler of New Zealand On Air, formerly content director of Radio Hodaki, a role that used to be called program director back in the day. Now, if you are from Auckland, you're familiar with Auckland's radio, been around here in the last few years, you might have noticed that Hodaki really radically changed its hosts and some of the music it was playing as well. Not radically. It didn't go from being a classic rock station to a polka, to an acid polka station. But you know, things did change a lot. So Dave was behind a lot of those changes, and I think he did a bloody good job, because it was getting a bit stale there, in my humbled opinion. We don't talk too much about New Zealand On Air. I understand with a role like that, that one would have to be fairly diplomatic if they were in Dave's shoes. So I was probably only going to get. I don't want to. This is not what I think of David at all, but I'd imagine you have to answer some questions in a role like that, as a politician would answer questions. But from what he can say and what we do talk about, he is very honest. And I think if anyone's going to move an organisation like that forward in the weird, wacky world of media we live in now, of trying to fund and support New Zealand music and culture, then he's the man to do it, because a lot of the sort of ideas I hit him with, is generally when we chat, we're on the same page, and I'd hopefully like to think I'm not out of touch either. Hey, you kids like text messaging? I have to apologise to Duncan Greaves, been mentioned a few times on the podcast, and I finally had him teed up. The Royal We had him teed up to be on the show, and a couple of times it's been his era. I'll just put that out there. A couple of times it's been his era, or something's come up. Not era, you know, he's had something on with, he's got young kids and so on, so he hasn't been able to make it. And then the day he was going to make it, I was ill. This is like a check in the mail story, probably as far as he's concerned. I sent the email, and then I turned my data off, but the email didn't send, so he was at my door at 4:30, and then I'd seen an interview with him prior that we basically said, like, if someone messes things up with me, I can be ruthless. I just I cut them off. So I haven't heard back from my apology email. So public apology to Duncan. I may never cross paths with that, but we've lost our spin-off. We've lost our spin-off interview there, which is a shame, because, as I say, he's been picked up a few times on the podcast. But I did joke to him before this happened. I did joke and say that if we mess this up again, man, if for some reason it doesn't work at either end, let's never speak of this again. So it looks like we're true to our word. Numbers are going well, for a New Zealand podcast featuring, important yet fairly esoteric guests in the scheme of things. The young lady, is that patronising? The young female, the young woman maybe just using her name would be less patronising. Verity Johnson remains the highest downloaded episode. There you go. There's some verbal highs, facts and figures. But then, that mainstream fame thing, I've been pleasantly surprised by people far more esoteric who have had some good numbers of listens, but all the shows have. I'm rambling now. Get me started. Oh, I've cheered up. Feeling better. Please like the show on iTunes if you are subscribed there, or like the Facebook page at Verbal Highs Podcast, or at Verbal Highs on Twitter, getting good new numbers each week. Shouts to Audio Culture. Thanks for promoting the Murray Kamek episode last week. Thanks to Hallertau Beer for keeping it real yeasty. Real yeasty!
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
Different people.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be fine with one of these, mate.
I've used a couple of these before in my time.
Yes. I said that to Tourette's. I said it to Dominic when he turned up, and he gave me a brief kind of, who the fuck are you, look like he thought I was being serious. I thought it was funny saying to a rapper and poet, oh, you've seen one of these before. Yeah. So how are you? I'm still checking the levels here.
Yeah, good. Better now for coffee.
Good.
Thank you.
I get the
Better
cab.
now
I
for
get
coffee.
the cab driver answer. How are you, mate? Oh, good. Mate. Good.
Yeah.
You've been busy.
The
You've been busy tonight, Dave.
The non-committal. Yeah.
You've been busy tonight?
Oh, it's a bit quiet. Tonight. I might knock off early.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. Well, I should stick around. There's a gig on at Spark Arena. There'll be 12,000 people pouring out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Another one.
I'm always surprised at how clueless taxi companies seem to be about events in this city sometimes. But anyway.
What do you mean?
It's a whole... Oh, I've spoken to taxi drivers from big companies and I've gone, oh, look, there's 10,000 people piling out of exactly that, the arena, there's blah, blah, blah on tonight, and they seem completely unaware. I'm like, you'd think for a taxi company they would put an APB out for all their drivers when there's key events on.
You think that, what would have been a blackboard or whatever in 1972, whatever the delivery mechanism, you come into work, and it's like, guys, this. What do you think about Uber, man? Like, I'm wondering whether people have sort of, what's the expression? Golden, like whether, how can Uber drivers be immediately better than regular cab drivers? People are like, oh, the Uber drivers are so much better. Drivers are so much better.
I just use it because it's cheap and I know exactly where I am. And that's probably...
But how can you not know exactly where you are in a...
Well, no, but I know, exactly where they are in relation to where I am, especially living down a long driveway.
Do you mean because they have GPS?
Yeah. As opposed to old school taxi drivers who have finally started texting you when they were on approach in 2017.
Yeah.
I take a lot of cabs.
They still, I'd imagine, they still had, what do you call it, like RT? What do you call that? They still, some of the cheap ones still had...
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
I know.
2010.
It's kind of quaint.
But I'm sure you've read about all of this, and Uber is only cheap because they're basically trying to fuck off the whole traditional taxi market, right? You know that they're losing money?
I didn't know they were losing money.
Yeah, their business model is like Netflix. They're currently losing money and hoping they can... So I'm with you. Look, I catch them, but, ethically it's kind of murky what they're doing to the old school.
Half of my life is ethically murky. I think that's the problem with modern living.
Hey, okay. David Ridler began his career at New Zealand on air. No, you didn't begin your career there, did you? At all?
No, but I've been back and forth several times.
That was a great start. David Ridler has worked at New Zealand on air in radio promotions, as a New Zealand music plugger, assistant New Zealand music manager. That's from 2008 to 2012.
That is.
And now he heads up New Zealand on air's music funding and promotions work. David has also had a career in radio programming and operations, with stints at radio stations as varied as Radio Hauraki.
No, Hauraki it is.
More FM, Radioactive Classic Hits, and Channel Z. One where he was a content director, and the other one where he was a program director, and I'd like to ask about the difference.
Oh, yes.
Of those shortly.
Yeah. Hi, Lewis.
Hi. So... starting at the very basic, I was thinking about it today. You're a David. You're not one of the many who's taken on a Dave.
I am a David, and thanks for noticing. Because I get it. People like to be familiar quickly, especially, because, hey man, how is it?
Yeah.
But I just prefer David, and I've been like that since I've been a little kid, and I don't know why. It's just one of those things.
So does it irk you if people kind of get more familiar on the email and call you Dave?
It happens all the time,
Yeah.
and it used to irk me, and now it doesn't, because I can't be irked with people constantly. So I
Yeah.
just realistically, I know that they're trying to be friendly and familiar, and so I don't actually know at which point in a relationship I turn around to them and say, I don't like being called that.
Hey D-Rock, hey D-Man, hey D-Man.
Exactly. But look, I'm not. I think I was quite precious about it in my 20s. Excuse me, but I'm certainly not precious about it anymore.
Yeah, that's the lovely thing about being post-40, right? Like, I'm so much less precious about things that I was...
Who said I was post 40?
Well, you were older than me when
I am older than
when I
you,
first met
and
you.
I am enjoying my 40s somewhat, because not quite as precious. I'm looking forward to the grumpy stage, which happens in about 5 years, I think.
So have you spent longer in the public service, with New Zealand on air, or longer in radio, or about the same, or both?
I haven't actually done the numbers. I reckon it's
Yeah.
probably about the same.
It was about the same.
I have done 2.5 plus 4 plus 1.5, so what's that? 8 years at NZ on air.
Yeah.
All up now and counting. So, yeah, I'd say I put in at least 8 years in commercial radio, but I'd have to have a really good think about that, and that would be tedious for anybody listening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's weird, because it's one of those things, those careers where at the time sometimes it doesn't make complete sense, and I'm not somebody who sits down and does a goal setting 3 5 year plans and all that sort of thing. I've just
you just sort of go on a vibe of where, okay, well, I'll go for that now, because that looks...
Yeah, or just certain roles have come up at certain times in my career, where the current role... I do know that I get a bit tired of the same old, and I've definitely been attracted to roles where I can go in and make changes.
Yeah.
Or where change is afoot at
Yeah.
an organisation. And that's probably a consistent theme through my career now that I am the grand old age of 44 and I can start reflecting a little bit. Certainly there's 20, a long time to go yet, Lewis, but...
There is.
But yeah.
Especially with the sort of marvels in medicine now.
I know.
We could be a third of the way through.
I know. I don't know if I've got the energy for that, but anyway. But yeah, I think it's attracted to change. I do, if a job settles into a routine, then I do get a little bit bored. Yeah.
But you're obviously very diplomatic and professional, because I've noticed that some people with that tend to kind of set fire to the desk and throw it out the window before they, move on to the next venture. So you've navigated that territory well. I was going to say, every time I had you, excuse me, too much coughing for a podcast. I might have to do my obligatory 2 minutes of editing of the 80 minutes. I've had you in to talk to my students. I remember you being on air back in the day, and then as soon as you sit here, it's kind of like you open your mouth, and for my money, entertaining media spews forth. So I always wonder why you haven't sort of stuck with trying to be on air more. Why have you taken on these? Because you do seem to me to have the vibe of an on air guy.
Crucky, that's that's high praise. I will. I'm actually a bit blushed, and I'm getting.
He's taking his jacket off.
I'm taking my jacket off because I'm getting flushes. And it's not menopausal, but thank you. I don't feel like I was particularly good on air talent.
Okay.
I didn't find it something. I liked presenting music-focused shows, but I think if you're looking at particularly the commercial media market, there's not a lot of music-focused presenting going on.
Yeah.
That's more in the realms of RNZ or, alternative media, if you like.
But even RNZ's not really... I like the way you've just completely deflected from that. So, but RNZ's not really music-focused except for a few hours a week.
Yeah, they've got elements of it. So, if I thought... And I actually did think about it the other day. Would I go back into radio?
Yeah.
And if I went to go into a presenting role in radio, then it would have to be a music-focused show. I don't want to talk about lifestyle or Kardashians or just brain rot. I want to talk about the stuff that I'm interested in. So either that's music or it's history or it's economics. Those are probably my three things that I could. You're going to end up. You're going
to end up at RNZ in your later years,
and that wouldn't be a bad thing either. Look, I've got a lot of, RNZ, for a lot of people who maybe make assumptions about that brand as a platform, it's certainly done a lot of work in the last 2 or 3 years to become a lot more relevant. And
totally.
It's fascinating actually under their new leadership and Paul Thompson,
Hey,
how much change has gone on at that place.
They've got my ears a large percentage of the time when I listen to radio, but then I was holidaying last week. I took a week off, and I normally RNZ is what I have on down at the Batch, because that's one of the stations that can be picked up on the Freeview down there. I consume a lot of it here as well, but I ended up defaulting to podcasts because I had so many podcasts to listen to, and I thought, shit, now that really, like what we've just discussed is like, there's a particular thing Radio New Zealand does that no other New Zealand broadcaster does, but hello, now they've got competition from me and not me, but you know what I mean, my list of podcast subscriptions piling up saying, listen to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's the same with any kind of, all kind of forms of media now. If you it's almost, I don't know about you, I almost feel like in this constant state of feeling dissatisfied because there's so much good stuff out there waiting for me to listen or watch, and I just don't have time. And
you get overwhelmed, and I worry, like I watched The Godfather again recently. I actually only watched about half of it, and I thought, I don't know if the youth today could make it through this based on content, the amount of content thrust at you. Do you take 3 hours now for a film that goes that slowly? And
well, you're certainly gonna filter your audience pretty quickly with a 3 hour running time.
Would you watch a 3 hour film these days?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, Lewis, I think one of the things I really enjoy about being from the generation I'm from, so let's say Gen X, born in the early 70s, is that I just remember clearly a world pre-internet, but I also am fully immersed in a on-demand world as well.
Yeah,
and so
I
really like appreciating sometimes, days where I can put my phone on silent, or actually it's always on silent because I hate the sound of phones ringing, but I can put my phone to one side in another room or switch it off and actually just go old school for a day.
Yeah.
And,
and know what old school is because you were there.
But I do. There is this kind of we are so bombarded with content options constantly that I don't know about you, but sometimes I jump on Netflix some nights and I spend about half an hour deciding what I might want to watch.
That's right. I do that. Sometimes I spend over an hour just flirting with content, and then I go, it's getting a bit late now. Maybe I'll just have a little. And then I fall asleep.
And then it's so unsatisfactory at the end of that experience. It's like you went to the video store and looked for an hour and walked out empty-handed,
Which I think I've done in the past.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny you say, old school, maybe that's a relative thing, because I had a young girl in my class only about 2 or 3 years ago, and something came up and I was talking about phones versus digital cameras. And she went, digital cameras? Like it was like us talking about something before Pac-Man.
Yeah.
So what about you growing up, man? How did you end up? In this music broadcasting game?
I didn't get into law school.
Yeah.
That was probably the first. That was the first step on my career path. Was not getting into law school at Wellington at Vic University. Yeah. And then I
thought so. It wasn't that you didn't want to do law; it's that you didn't get into law.
I didn't get in.
Yeah.
So I left high school in Palmerston North at the end of the first term of 7th form.
Yeah.
And I had really good marks up until the end of 6th form, and then I kind of went a bit rebellious and a bit off the rails. Not in any major way. I didn't go setting fires or, having bomb squad call-outs or anything, but...
not criminally minded, just a bit alt.
But a bit, I was a passionate and angsty young teenager, and music was pretty important to me. But I did fall off the rails a bit. Got sick of going to a boys' school and having socks up and marching and all that sort of stuff at Palmerston North Boys High School. So anyway, left school a bit earlier, so I didn't finish 7th form. And the year that I tried to get into Vic Uni Law School, the intake was particularly hard. Like they had a really high bar. You had to have, what was the
average B plus or something?
Yeah, and you had to have finished 7th form. And what was the bursary? Bursary, wasn't it?
You have to have an A bursary. You have to have
an A bursary basically to get in.
Yeah.
And I had
really
good 6th form certificate, whatever they called it back then, marks, but I didn't have any bursary qualifications. So I changed at that point from, because, watching LA Law all the way through the 80s, I wanted to be Victor Cifuentes. I wanted to be a smooth talking trial lawyer.
You do have a bit of Mediterranean colour in you.
Yeah.
Where's that from?
It's not from anything.
Okay, so I'm not the first person who said
no,
that.
No, I did one of those ancestry DNAs recently, just for shits and giggles, and found out that it's very boring. It's very kind of Anglo-centric.
You know, those are a little sketchy because they're just compiling a database of everyone's DNA. So you basically
I think it's highly sketchy.
paid to hand over your life keychain to some company operating out of one of those units like next door.
Too late now, Lewis. Too late now.
Well,
My spit is in their hands.
Hope at least it was accurate.
Yeah.
And then
So then I guess it was doing a
keep facing
BA.
the mic, buddy.
Sorry,
You've been in this game too long.
Doing a BA, and I went to England for a 6-month break while my mum was on a teacher exchange, and instead of writing letters, I made tapes because writing letters by hand was tedious, and you just can't keep up with your...
So not mixtapes, like dictaphone...
Like just talking to my friends.
Yeah.
And I'd get a 90-minute blank cassette, and I'd talk for like 10 minutes, and then I'd play a song off something I'd just bought down at Jumbo Records in Leeds. Yeah. And then I'd talk for another 10 minutes, and then I'd play another song. And...
you were sending these to your mum?
And no, I was sending those from where I was staying in Leeds back to my friends at Vic in Wellington.
Yeah.
And then they would sit around with a few drinks and record their one for me, and then they'd send it back over.
I love this.
Because, this is when... this is 93, so if you made an international toll call in 93, it was massively expensive, and the delay, that big 5-second delay,
Yeah.
So it's like...
So
blah, blah, blah,
people
blah,
over
over.
60 still go, hey, how are ya? Yeah, are you good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to say, over, and then wait for the reply. So I just got into this habit of making these tapes, and then when I got back, they had suggested to me that had I tried out for Radioactive.
Right. So they must have been involved with Active.
No, they weren't. No, I was the music guy in my group, but everybody listened to Active when you're at university.
I sort of miss it being up in that funny little corner of that building, because B's kind of stayed like that, and I know progress is progress, but I sort of liked it being up
Radioactive.
in that little corner of Student Union. It's very romantic. It's
look,
B's still. It amazes me. B's still got that little. But Active had the view. B doesn't.
Active
have
had a great view, right there next to the cemetery.
Yeah.
And then Radio 1's got a really good spot in the Otago University campus as well.
Yeah, and Radio Massey, when I was last there, which is probably 15 years ago, they had like a what do you call it? A portable building out in the middle of a sheep field.
Right.
A sheep field. I'm such a city guy. A paddock. Sorry.
A paddock. Yeah, some pasture.
Yeah.
They are in the building again. I think I haven't visited for a while, but the Radio Control in Palmerston North, Massey University. Yeah. But Active was...
So you came back to Active, you had never thought about radio before. They said, hey, well, have you thought about Active?
Had to fill out one of those, you had to fill out a track list of what you'd play on a show. Yeah. And I was like desperately trying to think of all the coolest songs I could possibly string together. And it was a stretch because I wasn't particularly cool.
No, I don't think anyone is when they start.
But I had just come back from the UK, so Underworld at the time was a big one, and had some Aphex Twin and a few other bits and pieces. And then I started doing shows.
Who was the PD? Can you remember?
It was Peter
Dickens? No, Peter, Chinese fellow, Asian fellow. I can't remember his surname.
No, neither can I, because he wasn't there for long. But I remember him there, and then Liam was there for a lot. Liam Luff.
No, that was you're forgetting.
He wasn't the PD.
You're forgetting in the middle the trying to think the expression Paddy Moran.
Oh, Paddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were some really good people, but it was quite. I was a little bit. The first few months, it was quite overwhelming because there were a lot of super cool people there, and I did not feel like I was a cool person in the slightest. I was pretty geeky.
I think that in hindsight, dude, it's just full of kind of cool nerds. So I think everyone, when they talk about it, was like, "Oh, I felt like such a nerd." I know. But everyone else is actually kind of a nerd too.
I know.
You know,
and that's kind of broadcasters and DJs and producers, if you like. The geeks have inherited the earth, but. I learnt a lot, and then I just ended up getting put into not bigger and bigger shows, but better time slots, and then I ended up on Breakfast for a while with a few of us, and few of us kind of rotated. And I remember Moo from Fat Freddy's was Wednesday mornings.
Yeah,
he was
that's
he
right.
was there in the middle, like Wednesday mornings.
And he made that ad with that sample of like, was it like, how about you and me going to bed and fucking some more or something like that? It was some sample for some record. Yeah. And you and Dani, I don't know whatever happened to him.
Daniel,
That was your
Hodson.
co-host, I'm sure.
Yeah, Daniel Hodson. Yeah, I'm not sure what Daniel's doing. I need to stalk him on Facebook, but we were really tight for a while. It was good. And another guy called Scott. I don't know what happened to Scott either.
Scott is now a doctor at Unitec. I bumped into him randomly on Queen Street about 10 years ago.
Wow.
If it's the same Scott we're thinking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it was just context for anybody listening is that back in those days, Radioactive had a different breakfast show every single morning of the week. So Monday to Friday, there was a different host. And that's why I say Moo was in the middle on Wednesdays and it wouldn't be moved.
They should have called it Moo in the Middle.
Yeah, Moo in the middle. Yeah. I ain't moving Moo. But when we started doing this, the trio of us sort of started doing Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and that was quite unprecedented at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was quite interesting. There was actually a period there where there were discussions about a version of that, and I also had a friend, Lou Taylor, who's a lawyer now also. Yeah. She and I were actually offered to do all 5 days, breakfast on Active, which would have been amazing, but she was too geeky at university. That's why she's a big money lawyer now.
You know, I ended up getting that first opportunity, right?
There you go. So you broke the you were the one who broke the mold in the end.
Yep. And hey, look, you know, obviously I was showing the potential to do it. So, but at the same time, you know, different things are about, you know, it's about timing and so on. Mark Kirby was station manager.
Yep.
I think someone who both of us knew actually came up to talk to him about something else and sowed the idea in his head, you know. So it just happened to happen then, before they moved and stuff. So Actor was kind of in a big period of change anyway.
Yeah.
And then you went from being a volley there and went into the industry proper to the competition.
I went to broadcasting school first.
Oh, did you?
I came out of university with a BA and applied for one job at the Office of Film and Literature Classification.
Would that have been being a censor?
I think so.
Oh man, that'd be full on.
I think it would be, but at the time I thought it just looked like you got to watch films and things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm sure you would have ended up watching a lot of porn too, which would have been interesting.
Porn, ultra-violent stuff.
Yeah, I probably would have fainted. Yeah. But anyway, then I went down to the careers office at Vic Uni and I found the New Zealand Broadcasting School in a folder and actually thought that looked really good and went down and had probably one of the best learning experiences of my life over that 2 years.
What did it teach you that actually doing radio beforehand hadn't?
It was much more focused on the professional aspects of radio. You know, like I guess the jump between alternative or student radio and commercial radio and things like marketing and budgets and programming rotates and all that sort of stuff, which you kind of did loosely at Active, but this was a lot more technically kind of high-powered. And also, I mean, I don't mean that in the wrong way. But,
no, I hear exactly what you're saying.
But also, you actually got to run a different radio station every year as well from scratch, which was fascinating. And that's where I became a program director. That's where because I was the program director of our station in the second year, which was an all 80s radio station called Planet 96.1. Yeah. 80s music for today's world was our tagline.
Thank you for that. So that would have been, what, mid-late 90s?
That was 96, 97 I was at broadcasting school. And then I got a internship back in Wellington. So I was really lucky because we were told at broadcasting school that when you get your internship for 6 months, you could be in Timaru, you could be in Invercargill, you could be in Westport, you could be in blah, blah, blah. And I go back to Wellington, which is where
Channel
I was
Z?
free. Not quite. More FM. More FM Kapiti, and then I was More FM Wellington doing mid-dawns, which is, you know, you record them at sort of 3 in the afternoon.
Was More FM then still
it was still,
like it is now, like female 35 to 45?
Yeah, it was a middle of the road kind of hot AC, but it was back then it was run by
AC.
It was probably more AC than hot AC, but
so
which is adult contemporary for those who don't know.
I was going to say, you wouldn't have known
media.
what hot AC was when you left Active.
No,
we didn't even have AC there.
I knew that everything on the commercial dial was evil, is what I thought when I was at Active. But I've since learnt that you know, as I said to my little nephew the other day when he was giving my other little nephew grief about something, I went, each to their own, Luke.
Each to their own.
Each to their own.
That's right.
And that's how my attitude to media
No,
is.
absolutely.
That
And what I,
everybody's, you know,
you're right. And I agree. Like there are still people I know around our age who are still really militant like that now. And to be honest, a part of me goes like, let it go, man. People are people, you know. But I think that's a part of being an engaged youth, you know, in your late teens, early 20s.
Absolutely.
Is you go, fuck that. Fuck
You're like,
that.
everything else sucks except for this.
Yeah. And the other thing I've realised with that, which is probably more, I hope, more poignant than what I say there in a general sense, is a lot of people just don't prioritise music in their lives like someone like you or I were, and that doesn't make them lesser people like I would have thought when I was 18 or 19. Do you know what I mean?
That is one of the biggest lessons you learn working in commercial radio.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of people don't care that much about music.
Yeah. Well, it's not that
They
even
like
don't
it.
care. They just
don't-
They don't have it right bang in the middle
They
like
don't.
we do.
They don't.
You know?
They
And that
don't.
doesn't make them lesser people or whatever.
It
It's just they got,
doesn't.
you know, shit.
Exactly.
They can. I've been getting really into fishing. You know, one of those guys will be able to teach me to tie a frickin' knot that I don't know how to tie. You know, people are into different
And
things.
you know, the reality is they also have kids and mortgages and
Yeah.
really full-on jobs and things. And you know, there are theories around music appreciation and ages that people tend to find be most engaged and leaning
Yeah.
into new music, and then they start backing off. And you know, that's why all those sort of classic hits and gold formats come through when you get later in life. Because
warm bath, man.
you
Familial
that's
comfort.
right.
You know.
I know what I like and I like what I know.
And also there were less, I've thought about this as well, I think there were overall kind of numbers-wise less bands kind of thrust to people, let's say in the 60s or whatever. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's easier to have a playlist of 1, 2, 3, X amount of artists, because now it's just a...
Well, there were less artists, I would probably argue, per capita, but I don't know if anybody's done research on that, but certainly less channels for them to be exposed through. So, you know, back in the old days, I mean, you look at when we grew up and there were 2 TV channels, and they
Oh, yes, I remember that.
So 2
yeah.
TV channels that closed down at 10:30, you know, broadcast for sort of 8 or 10 hours a day. And so if you got on one of those channels with a piece of content or a piece of information, that was massively powerful because you were literally speaking to half the nation.
Totally.
And now you look at how many different platforms New Zealanders are using. You know, you look at a weeknight in New Zealand as a snapshot and you go, okay, well, somebody's watching... A big bunch of people are watching TV 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, 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 blah. Then there's all the Sky channels, then there's Netflix, then there's Lightbox and Neon and all the rest of it, and then there's different YouTube, and then there's whatever. You go, man, we've lost we've gained so much, but there is that sense of communal experience.
I agree.
has gone.
I agree that I think, unless I'm wrong with what you're trying to say, is media consumption was a big part of our nationhood growing up, and that collective experience is disappearing. I feel less patriotic than I did as a kid. I don't know if it's because I've travelled or whatever, but I do suspect a part of it's got to do with the fact there is no unifying kind of, you know, media outlet now.
There's very few. I mean, people will say, look, there are a few things that still unify a large, massive audience. One of them is live sports.
The other one's hosking.
Don't get me started. But, you know, things like live sports will still bring a large audience together in one place at one time because there is a thing that it needs to be live. It's one of the few pieces of content that needs to be consumed live. But apart from that, we are increased at it in a rapid pace. We are, you know, all corners of the screen universe, really.
I did an unprecedented 25 minutes of research on you today.
Jesus Christ.
I was actually running out of time.
Is there 25 minutes of content out there?
It's pretty terrible. Yeah, spread across many platforms. But you did mention, or somewhere I read that you were quite into sport, which I hadn't known before. You're a big follower of different sports.
I am a big sport fan.
Yeah,
and you know, I've spent 13 years trying to indoctrinate my wife into the joys of sport because it makes for a happier household when there's a game of Test cricket
very
on.
general. So cricket, going to build up a personality profile based on sports.
Yeah.
So we've got cricket.
I love cricket.
There's a British thing there.
I love cricket.
A man who probably quite likes chess as well.
I wouldn't watch it.
But cricket is kind of like people chess.
I love Test cricket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's people chess.
But one of the ways I explained to Mel about, which is my wife's name, about sport is that it's not just a visual spectacle, it's also a mental battle. Yeah. And that's what I really enjoy about big sports events, is every individual on the park
Yeah.
has had a challenging journey to get where they are.
Yep.
And both those teams, their story coming up to that point,
Yeah.
and all of the drama that's swirling around.
Yeah.
So I know I'm reading too much into it, but
No, you're not.
that's what engages me, is not just the visual spectacle, but also the mental struggle and battle that's going on in a game of sport.
Yeah, there's a lot riding on it, in other words.
There is, and I because I've never been particularly sporty, I was always a trier, but I was never particularly good. I've always imagined what it's like to be that under pressure, where you've got that split second to react to something, and if you miss it, like a sky-high catch on the boundary when it's 6 or out at the end of the World Cup final or whatever game it might be, you imagine what kind of pressure.
I'm preaching to the choir, but there are people who have missed that millisecond opportunity where that has been the narrative for the rest of their life. Not only often for them mental health wise, but in terms of who the public thinks they are.
Absolutely. Mate, you look at that sailor by the name of Dean Barker.
Yeah.
And the whole narrative around this current America's Cup versus Oracle, and don't remember the comeback, and you look at Dean Barker and you go, he's the guy in world sport that was 8-1 ahead and lost in a first to 9, and that's going to hang over him for the rest of his life.
There's documentaries on the topic. I was just trying to furiously think about. There's one I watched about American baseball, but it's going to fail me. But it's basically about a guy whose life went down the toilet for 20, 30 years after a missed catch for a big game.
Which, isn't it amazing? And for a lot of people, it's just spectacle and entertainment. But I do love the build up and the mental battle that goes on.
So you're at More FM. What were you doing there for that brief period of time?
And I was. You
would have been quite young, early 20s.
No, I wasn't, because I remember I'd done a BA first. So by the time I got out of broadcasting school,
I was broadcasting school 3 years as well.
It was two.
Yeah.
So I was 25 or 26 when I started my first full-time radio gig, and I was at More FM Kapiti, doing kind of ops and promo, and I was writing a bit of ad copy, and I was on air from like 4 p.m. till midnight or something ridiculous, and a lot of it voice tracked, which is pre-recorded.
4 p.m. is a good slot. That's drive.
Drive time on the Kapiti Coast, mate.
Yeah. There wouldn't even be a dedicated show on the Kapiti Coast these days. It'd be syndicated.
You're right. Hang on. Yeah. Oh, I think there's a daytime show on More FM.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And so then I just kept, as people moved, I just kept moving. And then some shit went down at Channel Z Wellington with John Diver.
I haven't heard that name for years.
Yes, so John Diver and the management fell out quite spectacularly, and he got moved on. And so I didn't take his role because he was the program director. Programming got centralised up in Auckland.
But Channel Z was still a wee baby then, wasn't it? It was a new thing.
Started in 96 in Wellington.
Yeah.
And oh my God, when I first heard that radio station, I thought it was amazing. I really did. I think I heard Joy Division, Head Like a Hole, and one other band. You get a snapshot of a radio station by three. So there's an old theory. You hear three songs.
Why the fuck would you hear Joy Division on any station?
Yeah, I know. I just went, wow, this is kind of my radio station. So when I got to work for that brand, I was pretty stoked.
See, I've learned the business side of all of this later in life as I've taught radio, funnily enough. That can assure any potential students listening that I've had to learn this stuff as I go before I teach them. But was it two big companies back then like it is now? Was it analogous to NZME and MediaWorks?
It was close. It was close. So remember Can West used to own More FM and Channel Z? Yeah.
Actually.
So when I started as an intern, Doug Gold, who set up More FM in 91 as a breakaway from Radio Windy, he was still basically in charge. He sold to Can West when I was first interning. Yeah. So he was still in the office down the end on the 10th floor or whatever it was.
Yeah. So
and then Cam West bought, and then I think that how it worked was basically there was Radio Otago. There was a conglomerate of independent stations which basically merged with Cam West, and that became what is now MediaWorks.
Yeah. And so for people who don't know, this is an extremely reductionist take on what happened. And I think the late 80s, our broadcasting broadcasting industry, I guess, was deregulated, which was meant to.
That's right.
Which was meant to take government control of airwaves away and make it more of a free market,
Yep.
which sounds great in principle.
Yep.
And then all these little stations apparently sprouted up around the country in the 90s, but for anyone who knows about commercial anything, you need advertising dollar, and there was basically too many people or too many stations trying to take a bite of the pie, and advertisers would prefer having one place they could go. So again, very reductionist. The net result of this was that all these small companies were slowly swallowed up by what's effectively now a duopoly. So
yeah.
some may argue, and depending on what side of the fence you are, because it's actually quite a debated thing, New Zealand's radio market around the world. One side of the argument is that it's been one of the greatest things for radio. The other side of the argument is that it's effectively regulation again, but by the market, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So what do you think about two big companies running everything? Do you think it's a shame compared to the past, or it's a great model? What gets missed in that model?
It's an interesting one, and I guess casting your mind back over that last 20 years, because that's effectively 30 years now since the Broadcasting Act.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at my time in radio and music, which is just over 20 years.
Dropped you in there with quite an academic question.
No, you have, but it's really interesting.
Well, I was just thinking immediately about how there's all these little demographics that sort of are duplicated on each station. So your Myers and your Flavors and your Hodakis and your Rocks, and I just worry about all that content in the gaps that doesn't really end up anywhere now.
Yeah, and there is a big gap.
Because we talked about it at the beginning of Radio New Zealand and music and so on.
There is a big gap, and I think it's an incredibly competitive market, and that is because exactly what you say. Each station has a mirror on the other opposition company. The other thing is that we are per capita by far the most over-radioed market in the world.
Especially
we've got far too many radio stations for the amount of population, and while that's a great thing for as you would argue, it's a great thing for consumer choice. It's actually really difficult to monetize. When you're going, hey, New Zealand advertisers, here's 300 different radio products for you to choose from.
Yeah,
I mean, not individual brands, but there are a lot of different stations in a lot of different markets. That's why part of the reason the Radio Bureau was set up, to try and help be the one-stop shop for people to purchase radio, and then they would brief to the individual stations and stuff. So that's still in place. But it is, I feel, I don't know. I always felt like after Channel Z, and I guess there's part of me.
Channel Z feels like one of the last kind of alternative, for want of a better word, stations that was owned by one of those mainstream companies.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when it closed, I definitely felt like there was a gap for a lot of music that was coming in from internationally, but also locally made. Didn't have a home, and there's the student radio stations. Some of it was too polished for some of those, but not pop. But
hang on, there and I come up with one of the first bugbears I have with the heavily, like with with regulation by industry, is that where I've seen your career go since then. Had you have been in another industry, I'm trying to think of one. Building. Had you have been in building and you had noticed a niche in the building market that you thought, David Ridler, based on my past, can see this is a niche here that would work, you could arguably quite easily go out and find an investor, say the right things to the right people, and set up your niche in the building industry.
Yeah.
But even back then, you know what I'm about to say, right? How the hell would someone like you, an individual player, come into the market? And I think that's one thing that's really lost now, is that you can't sort of come in as a smaller operator with a really innovative idea and go for it.
No,
because
there's no available frequency.
Tesco and Woolworths, or whatever, BP and Mobile,
all those frequencies are taken, and that is really difficult. Having said that, I don't know now in 2017 whether I would have the cajones to set up a new radio station.
You couldn't. How would you do that? Didn't that last frequency that's going to be taken up by George go for 30 million in Christchurch? Like, how do you even?
Not that high, very high.
Okay.
Even if there were frequencies available, I think looking at the ability, having been through what I've been through and seen the commercial realities, you would have to. I don't know. Maybe you could do it as a part subscription, part sponsorship model.
But you couldn't buy a frequency.
But the practical, the practical reality is you can't buy a frequency at the moment unless you have some serious Larry Ellison kind of backing.
Hey, so if you've no interest in the radio industry, I hope we're still holding on to you in this 40 minutes in. I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of people, a lot of people, even if they don't think they do listen to radio is a huge kind of, it's almost like the cockroach of media. I mean,
that's what I've heard. I've heard it described as thus.
Yeah.
But I would say
I don't mean that. Cockroach is not a very nice animal, but it sticks there.
Well, let's have a look at. I mean, I think radio. Looking at radio's path over the last, say, 15 years has been really interesting, and probably we can learn some lessons in terms of what's going to happen to other media. I think radio is actually integrated with online platforms and social media really, really well.
Probably easier to do so than with visual stuff.
Yeah. I think the fact that radio is very portable, we've always, so especially if you live in a place like Auckland where you get stuck in a lot of traffic. Yeah, totally. That's a program director's paradise.
And especially that our ISPs have taken so long, still there's not, majority of people don't have unlimited mobile data.
No, that's right.
I think that's
definitely held our radio market up.
Yeah.
I also think, I truly believe, as a fan of radio as a medium, I truly believe people sometimes like that connection.
Yeah.
Connection with the outside world, because I'm quite happily listen to a Spotify playlist all day, but I get to about 4 PM and I'm almost quite bored because I've got there's no.
I know what you're saying, and then someone you turn on to a good announcer and they tell you exactly what's happening 4 PM in Auckland on the day you're listening.
Yeah, or they make you laugh, or you hear a bit of content that you might have or you get a surprise in the playlist and you go, holy shit, I haven't heard that for a while. So. I think radio's got all of those advantages, and it is the first piece of media that comes on when most cars turn your ignition on. Yeah, the radio blares up straight away, and you could faff around with your phone and go Bluetooth, hang on,
crash into something,
blah blah blah, or do you just go, I quite like this song, and then you punch out and you go, I might listen to Radio Live talking about rugby for 5 minutes.
So getting a little more specific, you leave your last New Zealand on-air role, and I hope I got this right, that's what you're doing before you went to Hauraki.
Yes.
And you go to Hauraki, and from what I can work out, it's pretty much you that really gives the carpet a good shake and changes what the heck they're doing there. Is that right?
I definitely had a part to play in that. I mean, I'd certainly credit to Mike McClung, whose vision for Hauraki was definitely in that direction, and that things were definitely on that path already.
But it's you that chose basically all the, shall we say, a lot of them were BFM stars of the 90s that an audience was screaming out for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look,
it made so much sense to me when that started happening. I was like, yep.
Again, I will share credit for that with Mike, because we both made those decisions. We both, we did tests where we had Matt and Jeremy, do some mock shows together and had a listen back and went, wow, this is really exciting. Those guys actually bounce off each other really, really well.
Yeah, because they'd done nothing actually together before.
No, they hadn't. No, they hadn't. But they were actually quite good friends, and they wanted to try out, and we actually, when we listened to the first demo, I remember sitting in the office just listening to that demo going, wow, those guys are really good.
Yeah.
Like, just everything from the way their voices sounded juxtaposed against each other to their kind of
the formula.
Their just understanding. And it was, you could hear that synergy or that chemistry in that first 10-minute demo.
And I've never thought about this till now. They've both got a different kind of really fucking dry,
but they're just distinct characters, like Jeremy Wells is this well-to-do, good-looking, lovely skin,
private schoolboy,
and then Matt was sort of cast as the slightly grubby South Islander from Otago,
looks like
from
he's
the
been dunked
band,
in a deep fryer,
and likes to rack it up and gets in trouble and all the rest of it. And that's one of the things they say in those, in any kind of talent lineup, is that you need those clearly identifiable roles, because if you've got two people who sound exactly the same just saying the same things to each other, there's no conflict.
You came in to teach, so there's one thing that with degree students, but the certificate students are pretty green, they're even younger again.
Yes.
And you and I sat at the front and chatted for however long we did, probably nearly an hour, and then you went off on this riff about how you'd sent the breakfast crew off on a one-day bender, and I thought it was hilarious, and by the end of it we were both sitting there laughing our heads off, and then we looked forward and there were all these very young kids looking at us like, I'm not getting into radio. This is scary.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Look, that was No Sleep Till Breakfast.
It's kind of pushing the limit in
It was
commercial radio.
absolutely broke so many broadcasting standards.
You didn't end
and
up
I'm
with
surprised.
a warning in a virtual file cabinet somewhere above you?
I remember pouring those guys vodka Red Bull in my office at 7:30 in the morning the next day because basically they were going, we need something because we're
What time
crashing.
did the show start? 7?
6.
6.
So that just so that you know, they started on air on the Thursday morning at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And the idea was start drinking at the end of that show and do a 24-hour bender and finish on air at 9 o'clock the next morning.
Yeah.
So we went right through. I remember having to pile them into a cab at about 5 in the morning at Lee Hart's house.
Oh, so
Put
you
them
went
through-
along?
I babysat the entire thing. And then I babysat them through that show. In fact, literally, I was popping my head in the door between every voice break, basically trying to keep them on track because they were...
So you
pretty
sort of
gone.
created this monster, and then by then you were a little bit wary of what you created.
Well, I was a bit terrified. I mean, because I stayed sober.
I know.
I stayed sober.
I know how. Was it just booze?
I will never tell.
Yeah.
But it's a long day.
Yeah, it's a long day.
A long day and a long night. Anyway, I remember pouring vodka Red Bull at 7:30 in the morning in my office on a Friday morning and thinking if the chief executive
Walks in now.
walking them into the studio to feed to get the guys back up for the last hour of the show, I thought if somebody of authority comes in now and busts me, I've actually breached pretty much. I'd basically be fired.
Yeah, but you come from an industry of a proud background
You do.
of hedonism.
You do.
So if some
You
1980s radio guy walked in, that'd probably be pretty tame.
Well, and Hodaki has its history of that kind of carry on. But look, we loved it. It was a great promo. People. I think that thing where it's, and I was going to say this before about Hodaki and what we wanted to do there. It's almost like creating almost a Channel Z type offering for Gen X. So they're a bit older. They're still interested in new music, but the heyday was the big day out and all that sort of stuff.
Totally. And when Mikey and Matt and so on left B, that's right, there was a gaping hole in the market for... And what interested me there was, probably maybe even more radical than changing the hosts around is, did you find you had to really... what's the word? Did you have to really campaign to change that playlist? Because it felt to me, like for example, my mum's partner listened for years, and he's just... In terms of we're talking about people who are not into music, he's as far away from being into music as you can get. Radio goes on for a certain reason.
Yeah.
And he'd been a listener for years, and I thought this will be interesting
Did he
to
hate
see.
it? Did he hate it?
He doesn't listen anymore.
No.
No. But it felt to me like even stuff I thought he'd find radical, like Paradise City by Guns N' Roses. But the time you guys changed it, I felt like when I turned Harrico on, I'd hear that 20 times a week. So was it hard to change the playlist, or was it just left you do what you want?
No, it was definitely. Again, it wasn't just. I mean, the way that those companies are structured is you'll have a head of content for music brands, and they will work with you on all of the music strategy for each of those brands. But we definitely wanted to make some noise. We definitely wanted people to start talking.
You mean hosts to talk more?
No.
Like
people talking in their spare time. Like, oh my God, have you heard Hodaki lately?
So you want to stir the pot a little.
Stir the pot a little,
and
and be playing some stuff that we knew from big day out experiences, and certainly my experience over the 15 years or whatever in music, that there were a lot of acts that nobody had been playing that were very popular.
Yeah,
I
remember. No, go on.
But yeah, I guess it's definitely a risk, and part of the thing is you're trying to do that within a commercial radio model, which is familiarity is key. You don't want to scare your audience too much unfamiliar music, and people will tune out, which is true. And that's arguably why student radio doesn't have much bigger audiences, is because they play a lot of unfamiliar music.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a struggle, and we definitely went through a few battles. In terms of, I would want that, and company would be like, that's too edgy.
Who's the company? Is that people based in New Zealand or overseas? Or
New Zealand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember tuning in once, and Mikey was playing a hip-hop mashup on Drive, and I was like, holy shit, my whole world's turned upside down. I never ever thought...
brain melted.
I would hear anything vaguely... hip hop or dance on.
Well, listen, some of the things.
Go on.
I was going to say some of the things I'm proudest of for my couple of years there was we put an electronic music show on Friday nights.
Yeah, is Greg still doing
with
it?
Greg Churchill? No,
he's doing George now, isn't he?
Yeah, they dumped it pretty much the week after I left. But anyway, there you go. And also, Alex Bean did we developed a show called Tuniversity, which was kind of new and new music, but also stuff that you hadn't heard for a while. And we'd do themed shows, like there was one on like looking at trip hop, for example, you know, and you'd go in on Bristol and have a listen to some of those tunes again, and that was really cool. And we'd put John Toogood on his Planet of Sound.
He's still doing his show, isn't he?
Yeah, he was up until, I don't know if he's doing it this year, but he was last year. But just those things which are kind of anathema to most commercial radio stations, which is specialist shows and block programming. Yeah, we gave it a nudge, and I think reached a whole lot of
your changes are still noticeable there, right? Yeah, even though they might have got rid of Greg or whatever, it's a different station to when you took it over those few years ago.
Well, I think so, but it had to change, and it's certainly still. I'm really stoked when I do tune back in and I hear Matt and Jerry and their kind of, it's like a cult, that show now. With the way their callers interact with them and the way they've got to make their own stings for each of their callers, and not each of their callers, but some of them, and some of their vernacular that I hear in social occasions all around the place. There's certain terms that I know where they've come from. They've come from that breakfast show.
Yeah. I've heard of that happening before. Totally. That's right. So they're setting social whatever you call it, precedents.
They are. They're mischief makers, that's for sure. But I think like I said, we were that Gen X station, that No Sleep Till Breakfast thing, that bender was really like, most of us now are too freaking old to go out for a 24-hour bender, but we all know what it's like, and we had a good time. But
also a generation or two beforehand, not many people would have 24-hour benders.
No.
It's very 90s
era.
Yeah. Human traffic,
yes,
blah, blah, blah,
that's
blah,
right.
blah, blah. Right?
So that was
my grandmother would be like, what? She's probably never been to bed later than 3 a.m.
3 a.m, yeah. Whereas you go, if you come up with the birds start singing, you're like, damn, where are my sunglasses? But, sort of those things. But that's the beauty of working for a brand that you really understand.
So you took on Mikey for
Mikey
Drive.
Havoc.
Yeah, that was you?
Yeah.
How was that? Did he did you listen to his podcast that he did with me?
I haven't listened to that one.
Okay,
No,
give it a listen. He's quite frank, and I wouldn't have brought up. How would you say, punctuality if he hadn't? But he did joke. He did joke at the end that I was here and I was preparing. When people are coming over, last 10 minutes, and I thought he'd be a little late, so I was still sort of in Lewis random mode. And the door got knocked on, bang on time. I wasn't saying he wasn't saying anything, and right at the end of the podcast, he said, "And on time, may I add." So my point being is that's one of the most troublesome things with Mike, bless him, brilliant broadcaster.
Yes.
Did he show up on time?
No, but you know what?
That's really bad on a big corporate station like that.
Sometimes, I mean, majority. No, he was normally pretty close to the wire.
Okay.
We actually had a little office sweepstake. If he was late, we'd go 11 past. 17 past.
Oh,
I reckon.
So it wasn't like an hour late.
No, there were a couple of times where he was very late, and a couple of times we made him do crosses from the road into his own show.
You weren't docking his pay like B did in the end.
No. Look, I love Mikey, and I've got a massive amount of time for Mikey.
So do all of us. And it's come, every time he's been talked about on the podcast, it's certainly not a diss from this end, but it is a phenomena that needs to be discussed because everyone knows about his...
and he would admit this. He's a challenge to manage. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he is massively passionate about music, and he did not like playing some of the playlist.
Yeah, I think it was Muse that he was most...
I hate all cards on the table. I freaking hate Muse as well. And I think that was the frustration, was that Mikey, I have to try to explain to Mikey, we're playing this because audiences, when we research them, they say they really like it. Yeah. But it's shit. I don't like it either, but it's not you and me. It's not... We didn't pay for the radio station.
Compromise.
We're serving an audience.
Yeah.
But, I'll be friends with Mikey for life now, and I think that's one of the things I'm really fortunate about.
You got to know him through bringing him onto the station. You didn't know him beforehand.
And I've had to have stand-up rows with him and all sorts of stuff, but I will always be friends with him. He's a great guy.
Well, he's got... That's his great... you call it a skill. It's just something that he emanates, is that... Because I used to do basically the Band-Aid before him on BFM, and he'd be so pissed off. He comes into the room, he's just got that friggin' charisma. Well, you know what I mean? It's like
Oh, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Daily.
Pathologically late. I was trying to remember the word.
Yes.
Someone said that to me years ago. I thought that was such a brilliant word. He's pathologically late.
Yeah.
But so, hey, closing up all of that topic,
Yeah.
he's been on B of late on breakfast. I wake up without an alarm between 6 and 7 these days. So the first week or two I turned on at 7, just hoping he'd be there. He's been on time every day. Other feedback's been that we all have an ego, that maybe the more restricting parts of his ego seem to have disappeared of late on the show, and a lot of people are like, hey, I'm listening to BFM Breakfast again.
I know, and that's, you know...
And it feels like a spiritual homeland without sounding cheesy.
You know, it does.
So like, what I'm to sum that up, it seems like the best bits of him on Brekkie seem to be back on later in life.
Yeah. And, you know, B made a big call there where they put him back into
people could have
breakfast.
laughed their heads off at him.
Absolutely.
He couldn't be... If he'd have been late for those first few weeks, it would have been they would have been the laughing stock.
But even also the thought of, you know, this is a progressive radio station where you're bringing through new talent, and then you've gone back to somebody like Mikey. But I would argue that, you know, BFM...
Someone like that inspires.
They do, and they're great talent. And what a waste to have that talent not available on the airwaves.
Yeah.
You know, people love listening to Mikey Havoc. And he is, honestly, I don't think I've ever heard anybody better with callers on air.
Oh, he's
than
a
Mikey
radio.
Havoc.
He's a radio genius. He is one of our great broadcasters.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, that's the funny thing with all of this is you know, hearing it back on, it's been great. So I guess I don't know how long we've got left. I'll have a look in a second. But your role at the moment is an interesting one. You're basically head of music for New Zealand On Air. What's the official title?
Yeah, head of music.
Head of music. Okay, so I got it right. And we've had all this talk about broadcast and so on. I mean, what a time to step into a role like that. Because even the name of the organisation, New Zealand On Air,
it's out of date, isn't it?
I didn't think about it. Yeah, it's out of date. Maybe that's been your next radical move. How's that looking, and how was it taking over from Brendan, who held that role for such a long time? It's almost like Mikey leaving breakfast. You're stepping into a role like that. How's it been going?
It's been good. I don't really, if I look a bit wistful and vague, it's because I don't really stop and reflect that much, to be honest. So
now's the time.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been really good. It's a big task because it's, as I said to you before earlier in the podcast, there, you know, when you had a limited amount of channels, your influence could be felt pretty heftily. You know, if you could infiltrate some of the big radio stations with a few songs, then it would make a massive impact. Still does. Radio, as we've talked about, still holds a massive audience.
And now you're sprinkling many places rather than pouring into a few places.
That's right. Yeah. And your amount of outlets is unlimited. So I think first thing that I've tried to do is really ascertain in the New Zealand market as you know, changes every year or every 6 months, but just keeping a constant watching brief on what are the main platforms. Yeah. So let's say in the streaming space, Spotify is the biggest platform in New Zealand, right? Various reasons. I didn't realise we were the 5th country in the world to get Spotify.
Can I take a guess as to a reason? This is my informal polling of small groups of students. Yeah. My guess is all my students have Spark. Have done a very clever marketing campaign. Spark is now the Vodafone. Yeah. You know, remember when we were like, oh, Telecom's uncool. We'll get Vodafone. Totally. Other way around. Yeah. Anyway, they've all got those free or next to nothing. Absolutely. So that's why they're with Spotify. And Spotify have they look at New Zealand and that deal, that telco stitch up as one of their shining of their shining kind of deals really. Yeah. So look, you know, working with looking at platforms like Spotify and going, right, where can we make an impact there? Well, you know, it's people's own free choice, whereas radio playlists are. You know, you can get in there and what do you do then? New Zealand On Air playlists and stuff. Well, we've done some. We've done some, and we're doing some. You know, different people curating playlists. Like we've got Barnaby Ware does one, Roots and Reggae playlist, etc. Charlotte Ryan does one for us. We put out a New Zealand Music Month playlist, which was basically 10 hours of music. So if you just want to jam some NZ music in the background or that's a great idea at work. Yeah. And then we do sort of event playlists as well. So we did one for Homegrown this year. Yeah. We did one for the Silver Scroll last year. Stuff like that. So can anyone put a playlist on Spotify? So they don't even charge you for that, do you? You just got to put the labour into doing it. And then it could be Joe Blogs putting one up, or New Zealand On Air. But like any content, and this is the massive brain melt at the moment, like any content, discoverability,
Who's going to find it?
That was
Who's
going to be my next question.
Who's going to actually?
So you need these. You need, for want of a better word, you need these ambassadors like your Barney Wares or whatever to.
That's one strategy.
Yep,
that's one strategy. Definitely. I think the quality of the content is a big ethereal kind of goal. Is that you kind of going, well, you know what? We more than ever, music sits on a global platform and a global marketplace, and I don't know. I'm still, jury's out for me on whether people, in general audience, are attracted to New Zealand music or just attracted to music, and if it happens to be New Zealand, cool.
I think that you and I came on up when there was a real concerted narrative that there wasn't enough New Zealand music in the public eye.
Yep.
And so I think the notion of that is probably so unscientific. This is my opinion. That notion probably has more credence to us than it does to, let's say, the students I teach. But further on from that, I think that's bloody great, because I think that means that what needed to be achieved back then was achieved. And so it means that, it's like saying, you see what I'm getting at. It's like, it's New Zealand music being the other. No, it's just music.
It's just music.
If it's fucking hot, it's hot.
And if I find out that
shit,
they're
from,
find out that they're from Wellington, even better. What a bonus!
Yeah.
But it's not the principal consideration.
Which again makes what do you do in that and in your role and so on?
Yeah, well, look, what I'm trying to do, we changed the funding schemes last year.
Yeah,
trying to make conditions as. Trying to make the conditions to enable musicians to go ahead and make the best music they can possibly make, and also provide assistance around what they're doing. So, building capability, giving artists the potential to go and meet with a music managers forum manager. We'll pay for a couple of sessions for new artists who have got funding. Just little bits around the sides. Song hubs, we've supported New Zealand Producers Series. Various bits and pieces to try and go create, and it's not a 3-month or a 6-month or a 1-year thing. It's a 5-year strategy, really, to build a really supportive environment around the music community. And it's not just NZ On Air's job. In fact, it's only part of what we do. It's also APRA, it's also recorded music, it's also New Zealand Music Commission. It's a whole lot of us. And
I guess whatever the situation is, distribution-wise, and all these changes we've seen and so on, I think, New Zealand does. We're not America or the UK, so we do need, it is easily, I guess, a forgotten island on a global scale, isn't it?
It kind of is, but it's also the economics around making music in New Zealand. It's really it's a real struggle, because you can only tour New Zealand. In terms of you're making income. You can't sell CDs anymore unless you might sell a few after your gig. If you're like a few drunk punters might pay $20 for a CD. But mostly you're talking about merch. You're talking about publishing. You're talking about live income. And you can only tour New Zealand so many times a year.
Well, look, it's like this. Someone was just saying to me the other day that I listen to a lot of podcasts of kind of mid-level stand-ups and personalities in the States and England, and people have said to me, "You've got great guests. I really like listening to the show, but the reality is, it's New Zealand and it's kind of not mainstream people I'm getting on in a sense. So, but if I was doing it in LA or if I was doing it in London or somewhere, the amount of listens I'm getting would seem friggin' far huger, because it's still that sort of same percentage of the pie."
Yeah.
Were you there when Lorde said that she was embarrassed by the New Zealand On Air logo?
No, I wasn't.
That's a bummer, right?
No, I wasn't. It was a little bit unnecessary, I thought, because
that's right. It's like just kick.
Yeah, and look, to his credit, Joel Little came in pretty soon after that, because Joel's first band, Goodnight Nurse. I was at NZ On Air when those three lads walked in and had their first meeting with us, but Joel came through NZ On Air funding. Most of his videos for Goodnight Nurse were funded, and that's I do get it. I mean, we're a government organisation. It's not that cool. I get it. However, part of the reason that we need to be identified for what we are funded is so that taxpayers know what their money's gone into.
Totally.
It needs to be. There's a sort of a bit of give and take there.
It just seemed odd.
Yeah, but she. I mean, you can't really argue with Lorde. She's our biggest pop star of all time. So,
do you like a new album?
I've only listened to it in bits. I haven't listened to the whole thing
Yeah.
all the way through. It sounds good to me. I just, to be honest, there's very few albums that I spend a lot of time with anymore.
Well, there's that totally. Back to going full circle, the amount of content around and about. So, what did Brendan tell you before you left? Did he hand you a little brown envelope,
He handed me a few bits, but you know what? I had the very very much the privilege of 2A seeing this role for 4 years between 08 and 12. So
you were his right.
So I was his, yeah. So I actually got to see and experience. We were really tight, and when I was in that role, so. I got to experience a lot of what he was going through and helped him develop different schemes. Like when Making Tracks launched, he and I developed that. So, and then you want to come in with your own thoughts and your own take on things.
Yeah. I've got drum and bass guy written here. Are you?
I am a drum and bass guy.
Okay.
That
went well.
I was very upset at the end of
probably
May
should have phrased it into a question.
One of my drum and bass idols, Marcus Intellex, died. Yeah,
I didn't follow that afterwards. Yeah, I actually realised a bunch of music I've got that I didn't even know he made. And it's all like, how did he die? Did we find that out?
I heard it was a heart attack.
Oh, right.
And that always stops me in my tracks because there's heart disease in my male side of my family, and he was my age. So, he was a year older than me. But the thing I love about the drum and bass I got into when I was at Channel Z, and suddenly my favourite music was my job. So I was really into alternative rock.
Yeah.
And then I programmed an alternative rock station. So,
but you're into drum and bass.
But then I discovered, I got more into drum and bass when I was in that job because it was an escape from electronic music.
Do you think that because obviously Active's just didn't even have, it was just starting to get a sort of commercial sense about it then, but I sometimes think it's almost like Channel Z satisfied for a certain demographic what Active wasn't doing. Like Active kind of went too dancey, dubby, drum and bassy for its own good. Because I've heard a lot of people tell me 15, 20 years later, I started listening to Channel Z because there was no fucking guitar music on Radioactive.
That's right. And I guess, but I always had a fascination with electronic music ever since I discovered New Order when I was about 12 years old. So I think, but what drum and bass brought when I discovered that genre was that you could have the kind of dynamics of hard rock or alternative music, but to pretty fast broken beats, and it was quite thrilling.
You'll have to tell me next time you go out to DJ, because I don't really go out and do those things on my own these days. It seems a bit odd.
No, I don't know who will I. I'm actually going to a drum and bass festival in Sardinia on holiday.
Really?
And, I'm going to Sun and Bass, which is apparently amazing.
Taking your wife or just
yeah.
Is she a drum and bass head as well?
Well, a bit like sports, she had to be indoctrinated, otherwise it wasn't going to work.
So what was she into before sport and drum and bass? Where'd you meet her?
She used to work at Channel Z.
Right.
But we didn't date when we worked together, so I just wanted to make that clear.
No kids?
No kids.
Gonna have kids?
Not sure.
Okay.
Not sure.
There's enough people in the world.
Yeah, there are enough people in the world. It's one of the world's problems is overpopulation and resource
keep
depletion.
Going to drum and bass parties for the next 15
I
or 20 years.
like any kind of music where an audience is completely as one and completely focused and excited and vibed on what's happening on stage in front of them, and whether that's drum and bass or Aldous Harding or just whatever it might be. I think that the power of music to bring a group of people together without being too happy about it.
No, I'm with you.
Is it thrills
I was
me.
a raver, mate. I was a raver in the
still
90s.
thrills me.
So what did you think of? I'm sure you noticed it. That sort of what would I liken it to? A bunch of cats suddenly fighting in an alleyway and then stopping. That all that stuff that came up around Aldous Harding online recently. Simon wrote something and then the spin-off wrote something.
He compared her to a goat. Yeah. Look, I didn't call Simon's bluff, but I remember when I was working at NZ On Air in Wellington, and he wrote a piece on not Aldous Harding, on Alanis Morissette, her album Jagged Little Pill. And this was
he's been writing since back then.
No. This is the interesting thing, Lewis. Is he wrote an article on Jagged Little. He wrote an article on Jagged Little Pill, and he started the article with, or his blog with, "I've never listened to this album," and then spent the entire 500 words dissing it.
Yeah.
And I went, right, you're a troll. That's what you do. You troll. You've got a platform to just troll and get people fired up about music. And I'm like, okay, cool. Look, I know Aldous Harding's approach and style can be very jarring for some people.
Yeah.
I think she's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And seeing her live is like a spiritual experience.
So you've
But
seen her live?
I have seen her
Yeah.
live. I was very lucky to see her at the Hollywood Cinema earlier this year. But, when Simon does that sort of stuff, I just kind of, I just look and go, and look at all these people getting fired up again, and I go, man, life's too short. He's trolling.
Yeah.
He will always troll. That's what he does.
But do you think he also writes some good stuff sometimes, or just trolls?
No, absolutely. But
I'm with you all the way. We're often on the same page with stuff we're talking about, but also, maybe in his defence, I think that New Zealand's such a small place. I almost think he's got balls in a way, because it's sometimes very hard to... Look, I'll tell you here's a story. I'm going to have to change some names to protect, again, being New Zealand. But basically, I was charged by the then editor of Groove Guide or Real Groovy to go and review a band that I actually have in the past spent a bit of time with personally. Mm-hmm. They're a big band. I went to the show just off K Road. It was one of the most boring things I've experienced in many years.
Awkward.
I had to, instead of writing the review, I told a lie to the editor that actually put me in a bad light as to why I couldn't do it, and that editor's never talked to me again. So I guess that's pretty gutless of me. But it's New Zealand. I couldn't write a fake review, but I couldn't write the review that I wanted to write because it was too close to home.
I would say I'm always a
and that other person doesn't talk to me anymore.
I always believe in being pragmatic about things, and that sounds very pragmatic to me.
Yeah, but I put myself under the bus doing it.
Well, there you go. A lesser man wouldn't.
Still shakes me. I
can tell. It's your catch on the boundary moment.
I handle that differently now. I'm sure I had something else to ask you before we talk. Oh, with the Eldest, by the way, you said you saw her overseas. Is she one of those artists that...
Oh, no, sorry. I saw her at the Hollywood Cinema, which is it's not quite overseas. Out in Avondale.
Out in Avondale. So she did blow on up here before she started making waves overseas.
Definitely definitely this, like she's on Flying Nun, but the signing, once the news that she, was working with John Parrish and she got signed to 4AD, that's, it is that thing where when New Zealand artists really break overseas, people start, oh wow. It's that whole thing about being New Zealander, right? When you get the tick of approval from offshore, you start going, oh, maybe we're all right then.
Don't you think that's changed a lot again in our I guess adult life? Like
changed a bit. I don't know if it's changed. I'm cynical.
I remember when I was about 8 or 9. Part of a TV1 promo for one of those British sitcoms was that one of the characters had mentioned New Zealand.
Yes,
but I do think that a lot of stuff's happened, particularly in the last, since around the turn of the millennium, where people kind of know about us overseas, maybe more than they did.
I don't think we're as desperate for attention, but I still think it's there. I definitely still think it's there. Kind of natural. It's 4.5 million of us. 7.73 billion of the rest of them, or whatever it is.
So just before I let you go, what's the future for New Zealand on air? Should we try and find a new name for it now?
Yeah, I was going to say we need to change the name.
Did it not occur to you until I mentioned that?
No, it's definitely occurred to me, but I've only been there 5 minutes in terms of this current role, so I need to keep my powder dry.
New Zealand
New Zealand everywhere.
I like that.
Yeah.
NZE.
Yeah. It sounds too close to something else. Look, the future. We are almost in some ways we are back to where we were with the music campaign anyway, where we were when New Zealand music was really scant on radio. Is that now we're faced with these global platforms where you're trying to make an impact, but really they're driven by algorithms that are determined by people's behaviour and people's actual listening. So things like Spotify, for example, it's like I said before, trying to get a song on a playlist on a radio playlist was one thing, but trying to get songs to infiltrate all of these platforms is a real struggle, and that's going to be that's going to be similar in screen content, I believe.
Totally.
Because you think about it, how many New Zealanders default menu after the 6 o'clock news, or if they even still watch that, is Netflix menu?
Well, not even Netflix. There's plenty of people. There's plenty of people I realised who just go video. What would you call it? Video hopping on YouTube. So
Yeah,
not even whole Netflix series or whatever.
absolutely.
Just 4 hours spent on YouTube.
No,
go to
absolutely,
bed, you know?
absolutely. And look, and YouTube's been a default video player for 10 plus years. So, that's nothing new. I guess the Netflix phenomenon is that it's very mainstream now, and that it's proliferating in a lot of grown-up, mature households. So, if you're sitting there with hundreds of thousands of households going to Netflix as their default, and there's 2 New Zealand movies on Netflix, and that's about it.
Yeah,
That's
it's a worry.
a bit scary for the culture.
No, it is. No, totally it is. And you bring up something really important about places like New Zealand and the areas. Yeah, exactly that. Like the identity thing. I don't think a lot of audience members really think about that.
No, I don't either.
Like the potential loss of identity, the further you get into this. Globalization's great, but with things like that, it's like, do we end up with kids with sort of half American, half British accents in 10 years?
Who haven't heard their own accent except in their household or at their school.
So you've actually got a cultural mandate there as well in a big
absolutely.
way.
And I take that really seriously because I'm very much in love with this country. I've lived here my whole life. I think
I said before, you've never done the live overseas thing,
I did 6 months when I was over in England when I recorded the tapes that changed my life.
Oh, that's right.
Just kidding. They did though. But I've never done a proper 2, 3, 4 year OE.
Yeah.
No. But I'm actually very proud to be from here, and I'm also very happy to be living here at this point in history.
Yeah.
I definitely feel a sense that I've got friends in London at the moment, and having been through Brexit.
No, well, we're safe. We're safe.
Brexit, and then the latest election, and that horrific Grenfell Tower thing, which is just such a glaring image of our times, isn't it? What's happened?
Well, the first thing I thought when I saw it, and I mean, it's not like I'm some genius in thinking this, but the first thing I thought is this is going to be some result of capitalism. And sure enough, it's like, we went. And how, I mean, it's a fucking tragedy, but how great is it that, despite what's happened, that activist group had been writing that blog. So have you seen that? So there's actually like feature length, what would you call it, record of all the problems between. Yeah, money. I mean, shit. It's a strange priority in the world, isn't it?
Well, look, that's a whole nother series of podcasts.
Yeah.
But I think coming back to New Zealand, we actually have built an amazing country, an amazing set of people and resources and place in the world, and I feel very privileged to be living here right now because I think it is a very unnerving time around some of those bigger countries at the moment. Through Europe, US, UK, etc.
There's something lovely about being strategically completely unimportant.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move, just briefly touching on politics, talk about your politics, but I'm just interested because it's starting to come around to that time in 3 years. Do you think National's going to make another turn in New Zealand? I'm
probably not really allowed to talk about politics.
But you just didn't hear how I framed that. I said I don't want to hear about your politics.
I did.
I said, do you think, as a educated member of New Zealand's population, do you think National will get in again?
Well, the last 24 hours notwithstanding, I think.
What have I missed?
Oh, the Todd Barclay meltdown.
Oh, I have missed that.
Okay, you need to catch up on that.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What I think is that I would be surprised if National didn't make it in for the next term. And the reason I say that is because there are a lot of... And it's almost like looking at the French election and how the French populace reacted to the frights of Trump and Brexit, etc., is that when times are challenging, which they are internationally, I think we all feel it. We're all a little bit unnerved, whether we're overtly or covertly. I think everybody's a bit unnerved by all the weird shit that's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I'm mainly worried about the environment with Trump, to be honest. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Then I think voters will vote a little more conservatively, and I think there are a lot of people who will stick with National.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because I also look at the English election.
Yeah.
And go, hey, if you can engage the under 35s, hell,
But
anything could happen.
But we haven't had something like Brexit.
But we haven't
over
had
here.
Brexit.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly right.
And
that's
also,
exactly what motivated that.
I assume this is not news to you, but worth pointing out what I think about it is the right globally. I know there are more than one right parties in a lot of jurisdictions, but the problem the left has is it's increasingly fractured. So you've got a sort of a slightly identity crisis Labour Party. You've got Greens here. You've got and then you've got National. Did you know I chased Conservative governments around the world? I think I left here just after Helen Clark got in, and then I spent 6 or 7 years with Conservative government in Australia, and then I came back here just as Helen was ending to enjoy the fruits of John and his friends.
I think we've got quite a moderate Conservative government, if you like.
Yeah.
On a world scale.
We do.
I also think that more and more things politics has become about personality, and I would venture that we don't have many big personalities in those leadership roles at the moment in New Zealand. So it will be interesting.
Before you go, this is pretty nerdy, but I really enjoyed them. Did you watch those interviews with the living? I think it's the five living.
I listened to them.
Really good.
I listened to them when
really
I was
interesting.
cooking,
and filled in a lot of blanks for me, like because I grew up in that quite turbulent. I was a little bit younger than you, so I remember a lot about politics then. But hey, I was 8 or whatever. So for me, it was really interesting, kind of filling in some of the gaps.
Amazing, and again, like wonderful. Like, very simple idea, but wonderfully executed.
Yeah.
That's that RNZ podcast series. I've just listened to them.
Guyan's very good at what he does.
Guyan is very good on those. And also, just those things where you're talking about, the end of the Muldoon era and that time where New Zealand was basically, in the shtuck big time.
Yeah.
Like, economically on the verge of collapse.
Well, we're kind of like Soviet Russia in the 70s when you look back, some of the things. Hey, I won't hold you much longer, or longer at all. Thanks for coming in. We have talked for 80 minutes and 7 seconds.
Cripes. Well, that's pretty impressive. Thank you, Lewis.
No worries.